So I would like to invite Diana. He is a person that apparently he knows exactly everything that you need to know in order to start making money out of your startup. And I would like to just give the mic to Diana and try to see what he has to say about his startups. Please.
Thank you. Hey guys, my name's Dana Madlem. I'm with a company called Rush Order. I'll tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, my perspective on the hardware space, and share some hopefully interesting data points with you today. So what we do and what we're here to talk about are some of the realities of selling and distributing hardware. I think. There we go. Cool. So a little bit of a background on my perspective. We'll start with some of that and then jump right into what do successful hardware startups really look like behind the scenes in terms of how they manage their operations, logistics, what does their sales channel mix look like, what to expect in terms of returns, all kinds of fun topics. There we go. So Rush Order as a company, we've been around for 28 years. I'm one of 3 partners in the firm. The title of VP of Services, which sounds much like a startup-like title, means lots of things. But not one of the founders, thankfully. I'm not that old. But what we've done over the years is built a company and a suite of services specifically designed to help hardware startups get to market. So what we don't do, first off, is make the product. That's your job. You're all much brighter than I am. You're engineers. You're working with your contract manufacturer. You're prototyping, designing, building, and someday you hopefully have a product that you're actually going to ship, and then that's where we step in. How many people now are actively shipping a product? Only a few. Anybody that's planning on shipping a product in the next, say, 12 months? Quite a few. All right, so a pretty early stage overall. So what Rush Order does, first off, is we provide a network of warehouses around the world. And no, we don't compete with Amazon. I'll describe that in a little more detail. In fact, we love Amazon. We ship a lot of product into Amazon's warehouses and to Amazon customers. First off, we're headquartered in the San Francisco Bay Area. If you're familiar with the area, we're just south of San Jose on kind of the southern edge of Silicon Valley. We have warehouses there as well as the east coast of the US, Canada, Holland, Hong Kong, and Japan, and more coming soon, including the possibility of Poland in the next year or two. We're looking at that as an option, just like we do in the US with sort of a bi-coastal solution to be able to fulfill orders. We're looking to create the same in Europe. So once orders come in, we'll actually ship them out to your customers. Those customers could be directly consumers who ordered from your website or via your Indiegogo campaign or whatever it may be, or maybe your customer is Amazon, or maybe it's Best Buy or Walmart, or here in Europe it could be Carrefour or MediaMarkt or somebody like that. And then last but not least, we're in the business of making sure that those customers are happy with their experience. So as they order your product, we want to make sure that they get it on time, that if they have questions about their order, we'll actually provide the customer support. So we hear all of the, where's my order, I lost my tracking number, I need the package rerouted, and all the way through troubleshooting and technical support. So early on, my robot's not turning left, or I can't get it to connect via Bluetooth. Rush Order's contact center is actually handling a lot of those issues on behalf of our clients. And we also make sure you get paid for the orders. So that would make sense if you're selling to a retailer. Maybe they're giving you 30-day, 60-day, or God forbid, 90-day terms. You want to make sure you get paid for those orders, and we'll do all the invoicing and collections, and then handle, unfortunately, the returns that come back as well. So like I said, we've been doing this for a long time. We do it mostly for hardware startups. This is not every client we work with, but just a sample over the years. If some of you are old enough to remember the original Palm Pilot, we probably shipped it to you or shipped it to whoever you bought it from, all the way through some really cool, fun stuff that we're working on today. And some of these here in the middle are no longer startups, obviously, and that's the point. That's what we hope to create. So my particular window and Rush Order's window into the hardware startup landscape globally, because we do operate worldwide, we're in the business of running operations. So we don't hear our sales pitches very often from clients. You're not giving us your investor pitch. We're running the real life day-to-day and probably putting out some fires along the way. So we like to joke internally that you might have some good friends that'll help you move on a weekend to a new apartment, but we're the guys that'll help you move a body. So the profile of clients, we have about 100 clients in total, most of which are, again, are hardware startups. And this gets into some of the real data here. So if you think about we've heard some earlier things about how many startups actually make it to market. In our view, by the time you make it to us, at least you've made a product and you're shipping, right? So that's a huge hurdle in and of itself. And then once you get to that stage, what we find is we lose about 20% of our clients a year. In particular, last year it was about 16%, but it averages about 20%. So typically in a single year, 10% of our clients will go out of business, and 10% of our clients will have a major liquidity event, usually by way of an acquisition, and that means usually the acquiring company already has a supply chain and they're going to shoot Rush Order and push us to the side, and then you as the founders go off and start the next hardware startup and hopefully hire us again. So. And of the 80% in the middle, most of them have a pretty clear trajectory. I mean, at that point, after 6 months of operations and actually shipping, we can usually tell, okay, this company's on the right trajectory and they're doing really well. This company is really, really struggling, despite everybody's best guess that they were going to be an amazing company. And so it's usually pretty obvious one way or another. There are course corrections that happen, but it's pretty rare. And what you hear about as well, and you'll hear about, I think, throughout the day, and you've probably heard recently or in the media, talking about how hard it is to get a hardware startup to market. We'll talk a little bit about. Absolutely none of the clients we're shipping this year in 2017 were founded in 2016. They're all older companies than that, which speaks to how hard it is to get a product to market. So we mostly do consumer products, I should point that out. We do some B2B, some industrial IoT, some enterprise IT products. Funding, and I guess I should categorize or qualify this. About 70% of our clients are US-based, and about 30% are non-US based. And some of that is what feeds into some of the funding rounds, the sizes of funding rounds that we see. So our clients, typically by the time they get to us and they're shipping, hopefully at scale, they've raised usually at least $500K, and as you can see down toward the bottom, 95% of them, so practically everybody have raised at least $1 million by the time they get to us. And what we see is an average, excluding some ridiculous stories out of China where somebody raised $240 million and those types of outliers. We usually see an average in our current client base of about $16 million raised in private funds to date. So that's where I'm coming from. I'd like you now to, for those of you who are shipping, imagine what you were doing yesterday and living the life of a hardware startup that's fighting the battle of trying to grow a business. And for those of you who are going to ship in the next year, imagine yourself in the position where you are shipping, and let's talk a little bit about what that reality looks like. So you've finally made it. You've got the product. It works. It's awesome, and it's on the way to customers. You're popping champagne, and then reality sets in, and then we'll talk about what some of that actually looks like. Hopefully not like this. This has only happened once to us in 28 years, by the way. We had one client lose a container. Not a common thing, so, but a funny picture nonetheless. So this is what scale looks like. This is a client that we had years ago. This is circa 2006 to 2009. If you're from the US or North America, you remember Flip Video. If you're not, then you don't remember them. But I think there's an interesting lesson in that as well. This was a handheld camcorder product. You'll see Oprah Winfrey there on the left holding the product on her TV show. That was when Oprah was a big deal, at least in the US. And that was their big press coverage out of the gate. And this is a good example of a product that reached kind of more or less household name status. I mean, they were a big brand in North America. They just started entering the European market by way of the UK and Germany and a couple other places. And then Cisco Systems, the large IT giant, acquired them for close to $600 million. And then very famously decided they made a mistake, never mind. And about 18 months later, shut it down and walked away. And so just an interesting case study. But this is a good example of, if you look at all those logos I showed earlier over the years, this is what scale looks like. You might see on the front end of this maybe a big pop because of a pre-order or crowdfunding campaign. But after that campaign ends, you'll see that it starts this ramp all over again. And so this is a good example of some of the seasonality, especially in a consumer product around the holidays. I think some of the blips in the middle were product launches. And along the way, some of the fire drills that happened as well. So for this client, we ended up pulling the entire inventory off the shelf, which was about 20,000 units at the time, flashing the firmware, repackaging the units because there was an issue with the firmware. And unfortunately, that happens more often than you'd guess. Even today, where firmware can be flashed over the air. And sometimes it's firmware, sometimes it's other things. So how hard is it to get started? As I mentioned before, 0% of our clients shipped in the same year they were founded. Everybody we're working with today was founded previous to 2016. The average time span from founding date to actually shipping to live customers across our client base is 31 months. So take that for what it's worth. Some of you think you're going to start and manufacture and be ready in 6 months. It can happen. I'm sure it's possible, but it's not easy. And the other unfortunate fact about getting started and scaling, going back to the firmware example with Flip Video, over 70% of our clients have had us go into the inventory in one or more warehouses that we manage for them around the world and pull all the products off the shelf and go manipulate that product in some way. So whether it's firmware, which is the most common culprit, batteries, packaging issues, issues with sensors. You think about wearable devices, and I can't tell you how many jigs we have in the warehouse that test the tension on wrist straps. All kinds of funny things that not so fun things that pop up. So hardware is hard, and that's part of the lesson here, I think, and you all know that already. I think what gets lost in the shuffle in working through the early stages of fundraising and building a product, as difficult as that is, sales channel management is just as hard, if not harder. And so going from 0 to that first unit is a big deal, but then going from that first unit to real big scale is even more challenging. So as an example of this, most of you probably have done, especially if you're in the consumer space, a crowdfunding or pre-order campaign. And you might be thinking, wow, look at all the direct-to-consumer, sort of e-commerce or crowdfunding volume we've generated. This is great. The one thing you need to be prepared for is within 6 to 12 months, for practically all of our clients, the channel mix shifts away from 90% direct sales to 90% indirect sales. And what do I mean by indirect? Indirect just means somebody else is taking the order from a customer who wants your product, whether that's Amazon Launchpad, as you looked at earlier, or learned about earlier, or Best Buy or Walmart or Carrefour or whoever it is anywhere in the world. So that's a pretty dramatic shift, and that's not easy to navigate, and that's where we see a lot of startups really fall down. So it's something to plan for. Direct-to-consumer sales via your own e-commerce store or via a crowdfunding site are a lot of fun. They're also really high margin, and that tends to attract or be attractive. If you think about giving away 40 or 45 points of margin to a major retailer, that sounds really scary. But when done right, it can actually be done effectively, and it's going to be important for your channel mix on an ongoing basis. So. The other thing we'll talk about is starting strategically is important. So it's probably not the case that Best Buy or Walmart or Carrefour or a lot of these places are the best place to start your product in retail. I think Amazon's done an amazing job with Launchpad filling this void, understanding that startups need a better platform to help explain their products, curate cool new stuff that people want to see. And there are other retailers that do that as well. So in the US, if you look at Brookstone, for example, is doing a good job in that space. Best Buy Canada, not US, but Canada does a really good job in this space. And even Best Buy US is starting to set up kiosks that are specifically dedicated to startups. And I think PCH and the Highway 1 group probably have something to say about that as well. So how do you navigate that? How do you switch from a direct-to-consumer company to an indirect sales organization? Part of the answer is you got to do the hard stuff right, and unfortunately it takes money to make money, so the fundraising is really, really critical. Large marketing and PR budgets are unfortunately part of the reality and are needed. If you build it, they will not come. You have to build it, market it, sell it, do the hard work. Most of the big mistakes we've seen in this area are when clients assume that a VP of sales is somebody who should exist at a much later stage in the company. We strongly recommend, and part of what we look for in onboarding new clients who we think are going to be successful is who's your VP of sales. It doesn't even have to be somebody in-house. There are some really, really good channel strategy consultants that are essentially your VP of sales for hire. Bring them in for 6 to 12 months. They have the contacts with the buyers. They'll think strategically about where to place the product, as opposed to going again to Walmart right out of the gate. But that's a really, really critical role that I think is often overlooked. Every single client we have is selling on Amazon. I'd be curious to talk later about different creative models that Amazon is putting together, like seller-fulfilled Prime. We can talk about that as well. So oftentimes we're shipping in bulk to Amazon's warehouses, but other times we're actually drop shipping directly to the consumer and still qualifying for Prime. And I think we're going to see more of that moving forward. Somebody from Amazon might disagree with me, but it's an interesting trend. Every successful consumer product we manage is going to other online or brick and mortar stores as well. In the US, for example, 90% of all retail sales are done through brick and mortar stores, not online. So it's still a huge, huge market and a huge opportunity to get your products in front of customers. So just a good example of marketing muscle on the left, a company that does a good job, obviously, with their Facebook advertising. This is still an important part of your channel mix, being direct-to-consumer, but just realize that once the shine wears off of your crowdfunding campaign and the press dies down, you're going to have to spend some money in order to keep the momentum going there. Again, about 10% of our clients' overall sales are going direct to consumer, and even to get that 10% number, they're spending a significant amount of marketing dollars to generate traffic and generate conversions on their website. And in the brick and mortar space, what we commonly kind of joke about internally is that retailers are very good at fulfilling demand, but they are not good at generating demand. So it's one thing to put the product on the shelf, but it's a whole other thing for somebody to walk over to that shelf, pick the product up, walk it to the cash register, and pay for it. So on the right here is a good example. This is one of our clients, Nido Robotics. It's a robotic vacuum cleaner. It competes with the Roomba. I think they're number 2 in share behind the Roomba worldwide. This is at a Lowe's home improvement store in the US. And so you can see a really nice display with a video showing off the product. These displays are really, really expensive. But unfortunately, if you're selling a robotics product or an IoT product or something else in the emerging tech category, your product's going to require explanation, and putting something together that's compelling in a retail store format is really important. So some of the mistakes we see that are mostly that can be recovered from. One is promising a specific delivery date. Everybody knows this one, I think, but don't tell your clients you're going to deliver or your customers are going to deliver on July 1st. Tell them maybe this summer. We like to joke, embrace seasons, not dates or even months. There are obviously competing pressures. You have pressure from investors and you have pressure from customers themselves. They want to know when's it going to ship, and nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news. But to the extent you can make a promise that allows you to still go out and raise money and explain even maybe to retail buyers, don't worry, it's coming this summer, that's great. But try to be as vague as you can. Otherwise, the customer support headaches can be enormous when you miss a ship date. A lot of our clients nowadays are also surprised by credit card fraud. So to the extent early on or maybe later on, even when your direct-to-consumer sales are only 10% of your business, you still need to be prepared for credit card fraud. So does everybody understand how this works? What happens if you ship an order to somebody who used a stolen credit card? Does anybody know? Nobody knows? All right. The big issue is, when you ship to somebody who used a stolen credit card, they're basically, they're a thief. And maybe you've had this happen to you where the bank calls you and says, hey, we don't recognize this charge on your statement. And you say, yeah, that's right, I didn't buy that. The bank says, no problem, we'll put the money right back in your account like it never happened, you're good to go. We might send you out a new credit card or whatever to replace the old one and change the number. But what ends up really happening behind the scenes is the bank's gonna go reach out to the merchant's account and reimburse themselves for the refund they gave you. So that means for you as the merchant, when you ship that product, you've now shipped that product out the door. It's no longer in your possession, and you're going to be out the cash for that sale. So you've essentially given away that product for free. It used to be 5+ years ago when we saw clients enduring a lot of credit card fraud or even attempted fraud. It meant that they'd made it, because it meant that people wanted to steal your product because it was cool, it was visible, you had a brand out there, and they knew they could go resell the product or do whatever it is they want to go do with it after they've stolen it from you. Nowadays, what we're seeing is it's happening right out of the gate. It is just, whether it's in Europe or in the US, even in like Canada and other places, we're just seeing rampant credit card fraud right out of the gate. So this is a big problem to consider early on. So thinking about tools in your e-commerce system, somebody like Sift Science is one, and there are others that will do like IP filtering or IP checks. So if the billing address is in Warsaw and the IP of the computer placing the order is in Florida or Nigeria or wherever, they won't let that order go through. It's really important. Thinking about insurance, we don't want to go into too much detail, but this is often one that's overlooked. Think about insuring the value of your product from the factory to whatever stage in your supply chain makes sense. Certainly to our warehouse, so that if the container falls off the boat or something happens on the airplane and there's damage, you're covered. And thinking about coverage as the product sits in the warehouse is important as well. And then last but not least, retailer chargebacks. So complying with retailers is not trivial. So thinking about how you need to ship to retailers, what requirements they have is really critical. They give you a book anywhere from 20 to 120 pages thick that says, here's how you're going to ship to us. And you need to follow those instructions very carefully. You'll integrate with each retailer if you're selling direct to them with what's called EDI software, or electronic data interface or interchange, pick your favorite term. And that data needs to flow through to carton labels that need to go on the correct place on the box. The boxes need to be stacked on the pallet in the correct way. You need to use the right type of wood in a pallet before you ship into a retailer's warehouse. All kinds of stipulations. And if you don't get any of these right, or if you miss one of these little details, the retailer will ding you. So they will actually issue a chargeback. So instead of, when you send them, let's say, a $10,000 invoice, they'll short pay it by, let's say, $500, and they'll give you a reason code that says compliance chargeback XYZ, and they'll just short pay your invoice. So you got to be prepared to go dispute those chargebacks often as well, because retailers do make mistakes when they're looking at these. Every retailer will give you scorecards on your performance in terms of compliance and how it is you're doing in terms of getting product to them on time and in the right condition and prepared the right way. So these are 3 different examples of Amazon scorecards. These would be examples where we're selling the product to Amazon, not using the marketplace or seller model. Kohl's is a big department store retailer in the US. Everybody knows Walmart. I've obscured some of the client names here. These also came out of our pitch deck, I think, so they show perfect scores. Some of the things you need to be aware of to avoid just certain death. I think the biggest thing that we've seen is, number one, not being prepared for that flip from 90% direct-to-consumer to 90% indirect. We call it the post-crowdfunding hangover. You've done 20,000 shipments because you just crushed it on Indiegogo. Everybody's popping champagne, and nobody's out in parallel talking to buyers at retailers or thinking about their Amazon Launchpad strategy or whatever it is that needs to come next. Before your campaign is over, and certainly before you ship, you need to start lining up those other channel relationships. It can take anywhere from 3 to 9, maybe even 12 months to actually get your product from initial conversation with a buyer to on the shelves at a retail store. I think about 3 to 9 months is probably a good guideline to keep in mind. So that means if you're shipping your crowdfunding orders in the next 6 months, you better be talking to others real soon. it is impossible, again, to sustain that direct-to-consumer interest. Let's see. The other thing is sell-in is not sell-through. So as we mentioned, retailers are going to be good at fulfilling demand but not generating it. It's up to you then to also build in the marketing to pull demand through the retailer. Managing credit risk, I think most people don't think about this, and it's unfortunate. There are some retailers who are really not doing so well, right? If you think about even in the US, 90% of all retail sales are still going through brick and mortar. That number used to be 99% only several years ago, right? So that means that somebody lost big, right? And so some of these retailers are really struggling. This was a real life story from a long time ago. You guys probably don't recognize these names, but we had a client at the time. These were some of the major electronics retailers in North America called Good Guys, Circuit City, and Sharper Image. And the client was popping champagne, all excited because we got big purchase orders from all three. And within, I don't know what short amount of time, all three went bankrupt and started closing stores and were out of business. And the client never got paid for their orders, and the client went out of business as well as a result. So not every big retailer or big retailer brand name is necessarily a success. You also have to evaluate them as a true partner and say, is this partner worthy of our business as well? So think about that. We know not every retailer is right for your product. You probably belong as a startup in an emerging tech category. If you think about robotics or smart home or anything IoT related or connected, probably an Amazon Launchpad or Brookstone or Best Buy Canada, or maybe here in Europe, there are some other equivalents. And then last but not least, inventory management and sales forecasting is really hard. I think one of the most exciting times we have with our clients is year 2 or year 3 into their operations. We can actually do demand planning, and we can say, okay, we know roughly how many we're going to sell by month or by quarter and by region and by product. But early on, trying to guess what your factory is going to be able to produce, what those yields are going to look like, that's a big challenge. And then lastly, of course, you just don't know what that channel demand is going to look like. And so again, trying to get to those data points early on by talking to buyers early on is really important as well for your planning. So this is an example of what happens when you get that retailer fit wrong. This is, again, I've disguised who the client is, but this is an actual return from Apple stores. This was 6 months after we originally shipped out a big order to Apple, and everybody turns around one day and says, "Hey, what's that pallet full of broken product on the dock?" And unfortunately, those are returns. These were actually brand new units. They weren't even opened and used, and you can see what kind of condition they're in. Retailers are notorious for beating up product in the course of returning it. So getting that fit right is really, really critical. And in general, when it comes to returns, I can tell you client-wide, our average return rate is 8%. So 8% of every unit, of all the units we ship will come back at some point. I hear all the time, hey, we're forecasting a return rate of 3% or 5%. Is that realistic? And the answer is maybe. It is possible. But usually we then dive into a conversation about, well, tell me more about this concept of nature and nurture. What's the nature of the product? Is it a complex product? Does it have lots of moving parts, lots of antennas, lots of connectivity? Is it difficult for consumers to set up, or is it involved for customers to set up? Versus something that maybe has no internet connectivity. Maybe it's not a quote-unquote smart product, right? And those are going to have much lower return rates. Then looking at things like the market you're in. You'll see that returns in the US and North America are much, much, much higher than the rest of the world. In Asia, we see the lowest return rates, and Europe is somewhere in between, in the middle. And product category also makes a big difference. So if you think about toys, for example, like connected toys, we have a couple clients that are, you can look them up like a Wonder Workshop or a product like Osmo. I don't know if it's that parents are unwilling to pull a broken toy out of a kid's hand, or maybe they assume their own kid broke it, or what it is, but toys rarely come back, and so we see return rates down around the 3% range for a lot of those types of clients, versus other product categories like wearables that tend to be much, much higher. Smart home and home automation tends to be much, much higher as well. So what can you do to minimize your risk of returns? First off, invest really heavily in beta testing. I think this is really overlooked by most hardware startups. If your beta testing program starts with, we're going to ship out these units and we're going to send an email or put a form in the box that says, tell us what you think, you are not going to get good feedback. You're going to hear one of two things. Either it doesn't work and there's something catastrophically wrong with the product, in which case, okay, yeah, you do want to know that. Or, oh yeah, everything was fine, it was great. In which case, that's not very helpful because, you know what, by the time you get thousands of units out there, you're going to discover that everything's not fine. And there were clues in those early tests that you didn't catch on to because all you heard was, oh yeah, it's good. There's one company in Southern California called Center Code. Give them a plug. They've built a whole business around managing beta test programs for hardware companies. And so whether you're working with somebody like that or at least trying to emulate some of the programs that they do, thinking really rigidly about, what'd you think about when you opened the box? What was your experience? Were you able to set it up in under 2 minutes? Ask very specific questions about each step of the process as the user opens the box. Consider now, early on, not just design for manufacturing. Everybody talks about DFM, but also what we call DFX, which would be other things like designing for repair, designing for test. If we can get returns back and refurbish those and make them like new again, we can use those as warranty replacements for the next customer who has a failure in the field. We can even go sell refurbished units. I mean, there's certain online retailers in parts of the world where you can go dump used product and go get some money for it. But just having a bunch of returns come back that are too expensive to test and repair is really, really painful. They sit there, they collect dust and storage fees, and somebody has to make a decision to throw them away at some point. So. Last but not least, I think, overall, a lot of our hardware startups come to us without a plan. Again, I think there's so much focus on making hardware is so difficult, and once you get over that hump, there's this big sigh of relief, as there should be. But what comes next also deserves the same level of thoughtfulness as making the product. And so make sure that your only purpose isn't to be a warning to others. And so this is the process we go through with our clients. This is part of our kind of internal deck and things that we review during the onboarding process as we're setting up a new account. Thinking at the top of this along the lines of the physical movement of the product from your contract manufacturer, who are the players involved, what different service providers or solutions you need in place, again, whether that's in-house or outsourced, and then across both channels, direct to consumer and roughly defined as B2B. And then thinking about the order flow. So you're going to have your consumer orders flowing through your e-commerce system. You're going to have your indirect channels flowing through EDI and then out to your warehouse. Everybody understand what 3PL is. It's third-party logistics, or essentially what rush order does, or part of your warehouse is essentially another way to look at it. But these are the boxes we try to fill in, and as we fill them in, we think about it worldwide. So this is going to be different answers in the U.S. or North America than in Europe or Asia or elsewhere. And so if you're going through and kind of checking off these boxes, thinking about who's going to do the work, how are they going to do it, where are they going to perform that work from, how does each step integrate with the next is often overlooked, and how much will it cost? And the cost can be sometimes really obvious. I mean, you know that UPS or DPD or whoever is going to charge you what they charge you. Hopefully, if you're working with somebody like Rush Order, you'll clearly understand our invoice. But there are also things like duties and taxes and other kind of hidden things that aren't always obvious. So make sure you're talking to somebody who's an expert in that particular box as you're building out your plan in that particular area. In closing, a couple quotes that we like. One from Randy Komisar at Kleiner Perkins, who says, "Distributing product and supporting customers is more difficult than making the hardware." I'm not sure I actually agree with him, but I'm glad he said it because I think it's pretty darn close to as difficult, if not more. And I know the idea of pivoting is maybe now a little bit cliche, but it still exists. It's still required, even for hardware startups. Wherever you see yourself 12 months from now, just know that where you end up will be very different, and be prepared for that. And so building a plan that can support that is critical as well. So that's all I have. If we have time, I'll take a question or two.